This starts as a pile of 3D printed plastic, but by the end of this series it will be a fully lit Prometheus RT01 rover parked in the hangar bay from the movie. Welcome to the Geeky Workbench. In this 4-part series I'm building the R201 rover from Prometheus and an entire hangar bay diorama for it to live in, complete with LEDs and weathering. This build will be about 48 cm long or more than 18 inches. I think the display being a cutout part of the Prometheus ship is very cool. Episode 1 is all about the foundations. Get everything printed, cleaned up, glued and primed, and ready for the fun paintwork later. If you want to follow the whole build, consider subscribing so you don't miss the paint and wiring episodes. I found the STL files on Gaahleri, where I also bought some other models. I printed these on an FDM printer in PLA using the recommended settings provided by Gaahleri. As I'm new to FDM printing, I'm sticking to those for now. There are a lot of parts and it took quite a bit of planning to keep track of all the pieces I had already printed. Most were printed on the FDM printer with PLA. All the fine details like the ladders, dashboards, screens and light covers are printed in resin because FDM can't print as thin or detailed. And I'm using clear resin because some of those parts also need to be transparent for the LEDs later. Let's get to work on the PLA parts. These are the few pieces I didn't finish taking off the supports yet, and I'll do that now. First, I didn't realize these caps have a little support inside as well, and I have to take them out. Then they fit right on here. Yeah, or not. Okay, might have to do some sanding here. The layer lines are quite visible on these round caps. There probably are some settings to mitigate this a bit. I don't know them, I just used the settings from Gaahleri and I'll just have to sand this and put some putty on. These supports up here, or the remains of supports, are quite hard to get off. Gladly they're not all like this. Well, this went worse than expected. Took ages and it's not really clean. I have to do a lot of sanding down here. But now you can understand why I left this part for last. I was kind of hoping that I'd have some great workflow to get the supports off, but yeah, seems I haven't. So I'll have to try, and I'm just a bit anxious to get out these supports and hopefully not destroy these really thin structures. Okay, let's go. Starting with the easy ones, of course. I just noticed here some really thin parts, structures in here, and I can't just go ripping everything out. I have to be careful of those. Yeah, but until now I haven't broken anything yet, so hope it stays that way. Finally seeing some progress inside the cockpit. You can finally start seeing where the seats will go and the dashboard. I'm getting quite confident now that I might not break anything. Famous last words. No. Okay, I did break something. This part. Just broke it off there. Okay, I shouldn't have said it. Yeah, in front, inside the cockpit is a really bad place to have so many supports. But I think I'm finally getting there. I made it. And I broke another piece, but it's from the same part here. So I'll have to glue that in. But otherwise everything is okay. And I got all the support pieces out of the tiny openings. And I'm quite okay with that. But it was at least as hard as I thought, maybe even more. But before we start sanding, let's do a little test fit. Yeah, I think that's such a cool vehicle. I'm really looking forward to this one. We'll try how well the pieces fit first. The doors. Because if they don't fit, I'll have to do more than sanding. This looks good so far. Yeah, I think there's still some material left inside here, so I can't fit the door in. Okay, and this one fits nicely. And it should open. Yeah. Oh, okay. This one broke off. Okay, we need some repairs and some fitting. Filled up this little support piece with UV resin and a bit of cardboard to give it a bit more surface area so I can glue it back on. I hope this will last a little longer now. So this door was printed like this, so all of this was covered in supports, and you can maybe see how rough this is. And I was thinking, instead of just sanding it down, I'll add some UV resin first, so I can smooth out the surface before I sand, and then sand the resin surface. I don't know if this is a good idea, but let's try. Already looks a bit smoother, and I think this will be much easier to sand than just the PLA. Yeah, the surface is pretty smooth now already, and hope this works. And before I do any more experiments with the UV resin, I'll try to sand this first. I think this turned out quite well for my first try, and it feels really smooth and it looks smooth. I'll use this technique before I start sanding any of the other pieces, and I'll try to smooth out every other surface, especially tire caps. They look very rough, so I'll do that with the UV resin too, and all the other surfaces that don't feel quite right. I think this already looks a ton better than before, don't you think? I think this is a good solution. Yeah, now I just have to repeat it a few times. I'm not quite done with all the sanding yet, but I thought I'll work on something else. I thought I might work on the display and glue the pieces together, so I can then afterwards fill in the gaps and then sand this as well. And yeah, that gives me a little rest from sanding right now, and maybe the first piece I can then actually prime this week. And my idea was to use CA glue for all the pins, and for the surface areas I'll be using a 2-part epoxy. Okay, and because I will be wearing this mask, I won't be talking. Okay, I've got all the pins in now, glued in, and you might have wondered why I only put 4 pins in here. These 2 holes are for the wires. They are tunnels, so I can get the wiring. There are lamps here and up there, and the same on this one. There are lamps down there and up there. Well, the first part didn't go as well as I hoped. There's quite a little gap here. Well, a little bit of gap is normal, but in the top it didn't quite reach. Don't know if you can see. I have to do a bit of gap filling there. Okay, now the display is glued together, and there are quite a few gaps between the parts. And yeah, this one was nearly a failed print because the spool was acting up. But a few gaps I'm not bothered with because that one will be covered later anyway, so I don't have to do much there. But the other things I have to fill and sand. After watching a few videos on how to fill gaps in prints, I decided that I won't be using UV resin for everything, but for these big gaps I think I'll try Milliput and thin it down maybe with a bit of water so I can spread it more easily. And this is the gap I talked about earlier. It's quite big, and yeah, I want to try that first, and I'll try from the outside. I also applied very thin down Milliputs to some surface areas to make them smoother. Then it was time for a lot of sanding. For the rougher surface areas I started with a 60 grit sanding sponge and worked up to 240 grit. On the smoother parts I only used the 240 grit. Looking much better now. Let's get it cleaned up for priming. I'm spraying on 2 thin coats of primer shortly one after another, making sure to avoid pooling or dripping. And while the primer dries, we can check on the resin printed parts. I give the build plate and parts a rough pre-wash in an isopropanol bath before washing it in my wash station. This helps the ISO last longer. Then I cure the pieces with UV light in the same station. But for some pieces the lowest setting of 1 minute was still too long, you'll see in a moment. As you can see, some pieces are bent, which is probably the result of curing too long, and some pieces broke while taking them off the build plate. and others just didn't fit properly. And remember the one piece I broke? I repaired it. So I decided to replace some glass pieces with PETG sheet material. This is much more flexible than the acrylic glass I often use, so this doesn't crack or split as easily when cutting. And I used the failed prints and broken parts as reference for my replacements. Now that we've got the windows sorted, we can start with pre-assembly. This concerns mostly decor pieces on the front part of the vehicle and the wheels. All other parts need to stay separate for detail painting later. And I was pretty sure I could glue on the suspension pieces, but most of them can only be glued in place after the two rover parts have been glued together, and that has to wait until the interior parts have been painted. Ah well, then let's make parts kebab instead. If the part wasn't on the skewer, it got stuck to MDF and wood scraps, to a sushi tray or a lid. Off camera I primed them just like the display before. Then I sanded all of the pieces lightly with a 320 grit sponge. After sanding I noticed there were still some rough spots and lines, so I smoothed them out with white putty. Which I sanded again lightly after drying. The final priming I did with the airbrush because I was worried about losing details and also because the spray can was empty anyway and I didn't want to wait for a new one. So that's the foundations done. The rover and hangar are printed, cleaned up, glued and primed, and ready for paint and LEDs. In episode 2 we're going to focus completely on the hangar bay, painting, panel shading, markings and weathering to make this feel like in the movie. After that, episode 3 is all about painting and assembling the rover. Episode 4 will be the LED lighting, final assembly and reveal of the finished diorama. If you want to follow the whole build and maybe grab a few ideas for your own sci-fi projects, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next parts. Thanks for hanging out at the Geeky Workbench. I'll see you in episode 2. Bye! Oh, and in the meantime, check out my other videos too.